All right, how's everybody doing?
Good, pretty good.
All right, so the main goal of this conversation and future conversations is to facilitate discussions on different topics that have been somewhat divisive within this country. And what we want to show is the ability for people to have dialogue, debate, discourse without it becoming heated or create beef, as people say nowadays, right? And I think that it could be a great example, being that you guys are young, you're in school, and it's something that even adults and our political leaders can't do. Can't sit down and just have a conversation. So the goal of this is not to have you walk away and agree or sing kumbaya, or all of a sudden you guys are asking each other out to homecoming or whatever, right? The goal is just to have a discussion, maybe have a better understanding of what the other side feels, and lead with respect for each other. Right? And maybe that can be something that reverberates throughout the rest of the school and community. So we're just gonna get right into it. This past few months now, since President Trump has been elected, has been a period where a lot of people have felt different views. It's been somewhat divided. So I want to go back to that point because it's almost a year now since he was actually elected, and go back to that time and just ask you guys, how did you feel when President Trump got elected? What was your initial reactions? And maybe why you were supportive, why you were against him, whatever those initial feelings were. So anybody want to take off? Let me know what you think. Or I will call you out. Robin, let's go. What do you think?
So after the election, I was pretty disappointed in the result, but I definitely was not. I wouldn't call it pessimistic. I was hoping that Trump would prove me wrong. He wasn't someone I despised, but it obviously was not who I was hoping would win. But I was not pessimistic. I was hoping he'd prove me wrong. I was hoping as the year went on that I would be the one eating my words and telling my friends, you were right, I was wrong. I'm just afraid that so far I haven't really seen a lot of positive growth to change that. I think one of the biggest things everyone noticed as the election was happening last year was just the divisiveness, that you were either so for or so against the Trump and Clinton. They're just very divisive candidates, and I'm afraid that hasn't really gone away. As the years gone on, it's been that same kind of animosity the whole time, and I know it's only been a year and there's still time, but just the climate we're in right now is one where you're either right or wrong, and there's not a lot of gray area, where in reality there's so many different things and so many just within parties differences, and it's very divisive as far as partisanship goes.
Yeah, I wasn't disappointed when Trump was elected. I was disappointed when the candidates were chosen on both sides. I think I would have been disappointed either way with however that would have gone. But I think that it really it talks about the state of the American people, just that those were the candidates that we selected, and that people are hungry for divisiveness.
Yeah.
But now I think that we're in a situation where there's a lot of crazy stuff going on. Politics is a lot more volatile than it has been in the past.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of younger people are getting a lot more involved in politics. Right. And I think it may, through kind of a struggle time in politics, be actually a positive thing, because this is extreme involvement. We've got higher percentages of younger people going to vote and things like that. I think it could be a positive thing.
You bring up a good point, because I think that a lot of people feel the same way. Is this the best we've got that we can offer? But I think you have to recognize these candidates were chosen for a reason, right? So then the question becomes, what was the climate of the country that opened the door for them to walk into, right? They took their opportunity and ran with it. So with that being said, were any of you more favorable towards Trump? Felt this is a guy to get behind? Is there anybody in this group that was maybe more that way?
Yeah, I was a Trump supporter for a while, and then it kind of took off for me when he started talking about draining the swamp. I was personally a fan of that because, looking at Congress, they had less than, I think, a 25% approval rating, and those people were not getting anything done, and I wasn't a fan of that, and I thought that draining the swamp would be a good thing. And so far, I support some of the things he has done, and I think he could be doing a better job at other things.
Anybody else? Anybody else? Support?
Yeah, people wanted an unconventional candidate, and that's exactly what they got. I think he's completely followed up with that. They didn't want just another politician who could play the game, and here comes Trump. So it just kind of fit what the country was looking for at that time.
Was there anybody who was like, God, no, this is the worst thing ever?
I mean, the one time that my mom has ever let me not go to school was the day after the election. Like, I'll admit that I was like heartbroken, like listening to Van Jones talk afterwards, being like, I don't know what I'm gonna tell my kids, you know, like just because of like all the divisiveness that occurred like leading up to the election, and especially afterwards, he was like what does this mean for me as a black man and like my kids? And I thought that was like really, that made me like afraid. And I think there's something to be said about like Trump not playing the game, you know, like being unconventional, but I think in reality, he definitely played the game. Like he garnered all of his offense and his campaigning off of like people in America who felt left out. And that's not something Hillary did. And I'll admit that there's a lot of understanding for why people voted for Trump for like the draining the swamp. But I think like he definitely knew how to play the game. He like these poor people who weren't as well informed as like some other members of the Republican Party, and he definitely used that to his advantage. That like Hillary is not for you, but I am.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, it seems like a lot of you guys agree when we say that our political system was flawed already, and that we needed some changes anyway. And Trump, you know, came in and showed that he kind of highlighted some of those. It was a rhetoric that we hadn't seen before, but maybe that's what led people to being like, well, this is, everything else hasn't worked, why not go the complete other way? But where we are now, checking in like almost a year since he was actually elected, how would you guys say he's doing? Like as far as a pulse, are you happy with where he's gone? Are you displeased? What do you think?
Of course, some things, like I'm pleased currently with how the economy's going with the stock market, because those are concrete things that we can see that have improved since he was elected.
Unemployment is going down
as well, but definitely I personally am not in favor of how he's handled different things regarding race relations and in Puerto Rico. But overall, I believe he's done some good things and some bad things, and I want to have faith in the office of the President of the United States that in the end, he will be able to do the right thing and put our country in the best position that it can be moving forward.
Yeah.
I want to keep my faith in him and not lose faith yet.
Yeah.
I believe that standing behind, or at least believing that he can do something positive, is what I'm going to stick with for now, at least.
Really?
Yeah, I'm with Jack on that. I have a lot of hope because that's kind of all you can do right now. And I'm definitely an optimist. So I would, and also I'm with all of them, that like after he got elected, I felt extremely isolated. As a big supporter of equality, I had no idea what was going to happen to women's rights, to LGBTQ rights, and we already know there's a proposed transgender ban in the military. Was one of the first things that occurred. Was not a good start. As we know, it was recently rejected, which is good. So I feel like there's a lot of checks and balances happening, but what he's proposing is not leading this country in the right direction right now. But I still do have hope. I want him to succeed.
Are you guys all pretty optimistic, or is there any raging pessimists in the house?
I mean, I'm a little of a pessimist because, first of all, I'm an immigrant in this country, and I'm also.
Where did you come from?
I came from France, and so I'm an immigrant, and then I'm also a minority. So during the election, when I found out he got elected, I was really disappointed that people voted for him. I understand people wanted change. I was really confused, honestly, as to why people voted for him, even after all the things he said that were very divisive, towards immigrants, Mexicans. A lot of what he did was spew hate, so I was really confused. and I just like don't feel that like things personally have gotten better, like in a sense. And I don't know, I'm more of a pessimist because I don't really see like what good can come from this.
I also wanted to add, building off of what both of you just said, my parents, like, I think my initial reaction was built a little bit from like my familial background. My mother's Hispanic and my father's Middle Eastern. And I felt that during Trump's campaign, both sides of my heritage, my family, had been almost like targeted and attacked by Trump during his campaign. And when I found out he was elected, I was pessimistic and I was terrified because I didn't know what that would mean. Like what Elliot said, like what would that mean for women, minorities, immigrants, LGBT community? And my only hope was maybe things aren't as bad as they seem, but my reaction now is things kind of were as bad as they seemed. In that things have happened, like the transgender ban on the military. And something that I remember of particular note was, it was, I want to say just a couple days after the inauguration, it was definitely within a week of his presidency, he passed an executive order that cut funding for women's reproductive rights and women's health care. And that was something that really shocked me, because I thought, it's been less than a week and this has already happened. What is going to happen in the next 4 years? And I'm still in that phase of, it's been a year now, and look at what damage has already been done. What more is going to happen? We still have 3 years left. But at the same time, I think something we talked about a lot in Feminist Club earlier this year was like Trump silver linings. Like, what are the good things that has come out of this? And I think the one benefit that has really affected me a lot as like, and us in Feminist Club, like leaders for equality and that kind of discussion going on in the school, is that Trump has opened the door inadvertently for discussions over gender equality, minority rights, immigration rights, LGBT rights, because now that he has targeted and attacked those groups are standing up. Like we saw the huge rise of like, the women's marches the day of the inauguration, that a conversation has been started, and that's significant. Of course, there are people on both sides of the conversations, but the silence is being broken, and I think that's significant no matter what caused it. It's good that we're finally talking about these
Well,
things.
let's play off of that. What other things maybe just through his office has anybody been pleased with or has been a fan of? Is there anything that maybe?
Yeah, I think that he's, for the most part, doing a pretty good job with foreign policy in some regards. I think him going into Syria after the Assad bombed his own citizens with chemical weapons, I liked how he went in and did something. He bombed that, I can't remember the name of it, but some Air Force base and destroyed pretty much all of it with a bunch of missiles. I liked that instead of kind of sitting by and then setting a red line and then not doing anything once they crossed the red line, which we saw last administration. And then I also like how he's kind of taking it to North Korea right now. And I think ratcheting up the rhetoric with Kim Jong-un is actually good, because for the most part we've seen the US kind of just let him have his way over there, kind of do what he wants, and I like how he's not going to get a free pass during this administration.
But do we want to be urging on somebody who has their hands on nuclear weapons that could access South Korea? Do we want to be spurring on conflict with somebody like that?
We do not. We don't.
Sorry, you go.
We do not want conflict or war in any way, shape, or form. What is nice and what is comforting, maybe I stand alone with this, but to have kind of just this strong voice in the Oval Office that can almost keep foreign entities like Kim Jong-un, almost feel like kind of keep them in check, as knowing like, I guess it's a nice comforting thing with foreign policy to have a strong body in there to be able to keep people like Kim Jong-un in check.
And it kind of is a throwback to the days of what America kind of built itself on. I look at it as, I call it the John Wayne vibe, right? Like that, we're not going to tread on us, that mindset. But then the question is, how has it been effective? Has it been effective on an international scale? I mean, you've lived in other countries, maybe some of you've traveled. What is the rest of the world? How do you think they view Trump? How do they look at us as a whole?
Well, I know that after the election, like I had a lot of like people text me and ask me like, what happened? Like, why was Trump elected? I feel like a majority of the people were very confused as to why he was voted in, and like we're pretty sure that Hillary was going to win. And when he didn't, like even now people are just still like in awe that he actually won the election and that so many American people actually voted for him.
Okay, but the rhetoric that he's giving, though, as far as on a military level, do you guys think it's been effective, or do you think that people are bothered by it?
I kind of want to hear more about this like strong voice you're referring to, like about like what that means for America and what that actually does as it pertains to foreign policy.
Well, I guess being kind of like a leader on the world stage, kind of like if we set a positive example and set an example that we will not tolerate oppression of genocide, things like that that are happening in countries like North Korea, happening in North Korea, that can set a precedent for the rest of the world and make other countries, I guess, support that kind of justice mindset to where countries like North Korea will be deterred to act that way if they feel like they have many other countries, along with the United States, backing that idea of justice worldwide.
I completely agree
And
with you.
human rights as well.
I completely agree with you, and I think it's really important that we take strong stances on things like that. But what worries me about Trump is the way that he delivers that rhetoric, and what has always worried me about Trump, more so than policies even. I mean, policies come and go. We see Trump dismantling a lot of things Obama did. We saw Obama do the same to Bush. That stuff comes and goes. But what to me is more indicative of where we are at a country, and also what the rest of the world views us as, is what the president says and does has a big impact on citizens, on on our worldview, and the fact that he's not making these strong statements in a press conference or in a speech. He's making them on Twitter, and a lot of times there's been tons of times where he's had misinformed statements or facts, as he calls them, and just the anger that is in a lot of these tweets. It just is not. I mean, you can say what you will about his presidency. I for one, I've been pleased with some of his economic policies, but I find it hard for even Republicans who support him to support some of his tweets, just as from the stance of, it's hard to argue that they're presidential, a lot of them.
If I could build off of what Robbie just said, Jack, you talked about like the precedent that he's setting on the world stage for foreign policy. I think the more important precedent to consider here is what Robbie was talking about, Trump as a person. This is like a conversation I remember having with my mom, like the day after the election, is that for years, I mean, people are raised being told, like, be a good person, be kind to others, don't be insulting, be gentle to everyone, be sympathetic, and you will go far in this world with that level of kindness. And I feel like Trump has kind of turned that on his head. Like, he's kind of shown us that you can be loud, you can be insulting, you can be angry, and use the language that we've seen in his tweets that Robbie was referencing, and you can make it to the highest position of power in this country, being that kind of person. And I think that is an interesting precedent to consider. That, like, we've never had, like, we kept talking about him being an unconventional candidate. We've never had a political leader quite like this before. And I think that really is setting the stage for potentially future leaders, for people to think, like, I could say something very controversial, potentially very insulting, and it will not have serious repercussions.
Do you guys think, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, is that indicative of just who he is as a person, or is that the language that was needed for the state and times that we're at? Like, was that what was needed to cut through a lot of what was going on? Because as you all agreed, you know, the state of our country before the election, we all kind of felt like, oh my God, it's the same thing, right? I mean, and I for one was an Obama supporter, and I loved Obama. A lot of it was just from the way he carried himself, right? But I can also say there were policies that I disagreed with, and I felt like things didn't move in a way that I wanted them to move. And maybe, does anybody here feel like, well, we kind of have to look past that, we need to be strong-fisted or iron-willed, or is that something that we have to improve upon?
It's so here, I'll start with back in the campaign. I felt that he needed the rhetoric to kind of cement where he was coming from and kind of gain a voice, because at first I don't think well, nobody took him seriously. I mean, you look back at all the news shows and they're like, oh, Trump's doing this publicity stunt, blah, blah, blah. And so I felt like he needed the rhetoric, and then he is continuing with the rhetoric. And yes, it's divisive, but I think we can all agree that the division is coming on both sides as well. It's not just the Republicans. You've got, on the other side during the campaign, you have Hillary Clinton at a donor event calling half of Trump supporters deplorables, yeah. And so, I mean, on both sides it's divisive. And you see at the Women's March that Iman brought up earlier, most of them, or all of them, were pro-choice, and they were not allowing in pro-life women's groups. And so I think there is a lot of division, and it's coming from both sides, and it's important to recognize that, not just completely blame Trump on that.
And you bring up a good point, and it kind of goes into our next talking point. One thing we have noticed is that it seems like that gray area where a lot of people kind of want to be you're being pushed out of it. It's almost like you have to be on one side or the other, right? But even within political parties, there's division, you know? I mean, you look at recently, was it Corker from Tennessee that got into it with President Trump? And even Paul Ryan has been kind of torn in certain manners. So do you guys feel like the division within the parties has gotten bigger? And if so, why? Like, what is it that's splitting our political views? Ellie?
Well, as research said, there's the whole pro-choice, pro-life thing within the Democratic Party, which I think is quite interesting because personally, I feel like being pro-choice is kind of essential to being part of the Democratic Party, but at the same time, I don't know. I feel like gray area is a good place to be. You're open to different views, and if somebody wants to identify as a Democrat and they don't believe in that, then okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
Me personally, I do align myself with that, but that I don't feel like you necessarily have to. I don't know. I enjoy gray area.
Well, but what's led to this division? Like, why are we so divided? I mean, you look, case in point, Charlottesville, right? Like, people cannot agree to disagree. You know, if you are a Trump supporter, do not talk to me. I mean, I've seen it as an adult on my Facebook feed. Adults, some of y'all parents. I'm not gonna tell y'all who. Okay, but some of the parents from East, if you follow this person or you support this person, unfriend me now. You're not gonna like what I post. Like, they don't even want to have the conversation, right? And so, what has led to that? What took us to that point?
Are you saying the division between parties or the division within parties?
Both.
Well,
I think as a society, what's led to all this division?
you can go ahead.
Well, to kind of build off what you were saying with Facebook, I think a lot of it's with the new, not necessarily new now, but the mass
Platform.
Yeah, the platform that everybody has through social media.
Yeah.
And especially with these media networks like Fox and CNN, MSNBC, being able to constantly, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, constantly running political things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always on people's minds, and it's just with
And we don't stop to verify to see if it's
exactly
legitimate, yeah.
that where people can only watch one network, for example, and only get one side of the story.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe a lot of the social media as well, people having that platform to be able to be, and especially with the ability to be anonymous with it as well, gives these people an opportunity to be rude and cruel to others when they wouldn't necessarily say it to their face.
Right.
And I believe social media has played a big part in this as well.
Would you agree?
Yeah, I feel like we have seen like a rise in these internet trolls just going around being able to say whatever they want to say whenever they want to say it, and they can just hide behind this screen, like, so no one knows like who they are. They can't get held accountable for what they're saying. And people can just say like anything. It doesn't have to be factual. It doesn't have to be intellectual or anything, because people will just take it as fact and run with it.
Mm-hmm. It's like everybody's looking for whatever's going to support what they were already thinking.
Yeah, I had the privilege of speaking briefly with Senator Moran recently, and just about the climate of the Senate and what things are like in Washington. and he was really frustrated. There is a lot of divisiveness coming from the executive branch, and he actually told me that Congress is responding onto all that pressure. They're under a lot of pressure from society and also from the executive branch at the same time. And a lot of this is kind of pushing parties together actually in Congress, and getting a lot more done than has been in previous presidencies. And I think that's really interesting, that kind of problems and the divisiveness of society and the executive branch has kind of pushed Congress to be forced to work together, be bipartisan, and be really like to compromise on a lot of bills and things like that. And Senator Moran is on a lot of military boards, and he said it's been very hectic with all the rhetoric that Trump is bringing to North Korea and to the Middle East, but that a lot of Republicans and Democrats are coming together and actually talking about the issues that they wouldn't have talked before. So
And the hope is that, I mean, what's it gonna take for that to trickle down to us, right?
Yeah.
Because, you know, I saw both sides, right? I remember the day, going back to like the response after the election, I had students come in my room crying, right? And I also saw students walking down the hall telling like a Latino student, you better get ready to get deported, or that wall's coming, you know? So there was like some people who were super proud, you had people who were depressed. So what's it gonna take for us as a people, right, to unite? Yeah.
I think it was revealed in a CNN poll that came out on October 5th of this year, saying that 64% of Democrats and 55% of Republicans say they have just a few or no friends in the opposing party. So ultimately, we're just blinding ourselves from the views of other people, and I think this is a great way to get that out of the way. But we're completely ignoring the other side of the issue and just not understanding what's happening on the other side of the aisle, which is why we see such divisiveness in our country today. So what we really need to do is just sit down and talk with somebody who doesn't agree with you at all and see what they have to say.
So those numbers are obviously, I think, pretty scary to all of us, but one thing that kind of makes me a little bit optimistic about the divisiveness that we're seeing is, I feel like it takes polarizing events, polarizing candidates, polarizing discussions to make any progress happen. And so I think that excites me a little bit, but I think it needs to be our parties, within parties, between parties, within each other, it needs to be more of a discourse and discussion rather than a divisiveness. And I think a lot of that starts with what rhetoric we as a country are seeing from the office of the presidency, as well as from other politicians on both sides, as well as from media outlets. It's just, we're being fed so much information about this hateful rhetoric, and I think if it starts at the top of being more positive, more discussion based, I think that'll start to trickle down and have more of an impact than we think it will.
And the discussion that my teachers had has to be educated. You know, you can't just have an emotional discussion, because it'll end at a certain point, right? I mean, how many people scroll down Twitter and they retweet something or respond to what they first see, but they don't click on the article that has the information behind it, right? And so when you can have an educated discourse, you may be able to not necessarily sway someone, but they'll walk away and say, okay, I understand why you feel the way that you feel now, as opposed to it being just an emotional thing. And I think that's part of what's led to the divisiveness, is that we're all really emotional right now, right? Like, I'm upset at something that hit me at my core emotionally. I might not be able to verbalize it, so then it's just an emotional response, like a child, you know? So what else? I mean, what else do you think we need? Olive, I see the wheels turning right now.
I mean, personally, I think the discussion about like party division is like sort of counterintuitive, because when you have a political system that's like functionally divided into two parties, that's like division. I'm not sure like what we're supposed to do along the lines of like making Republicans and Democrats agree. That's just like not really a thing. I think what we need to be talking about is like the action that's been taken due to this divisiveness. And I think something, I don't know who mentioned the rhetoric, but like this like trickle down or like spillover sort of justice effect that I know you're talking about too, with the like North Korea statements. I think that like we definitely need to start with the rhetoric, and this is sort of like an indictment of the rhetoric that comes directly from the office. I'll admit that like when you have these tweets and this like purely like fury like anger-based like campaigning, I think that definitely emboldens people to act upon like their feelings, and it's definitely like, I know you were talking about how other people in other countries like don't understand how this happened, and it definitely like reveals the heart of America, of, like how many people just feel left out of the picture. And I think that's something that Trump did a good job of, was like really appealing to the people who are left out now, versus like Hillary had this idea of like what she wanted America to be, and that's simply not what it is. And so I think we really need to start with like how we talk about these issues.
We should be thinking too.
Yeah, I think a lot of the divisions came from the campaign, and then I think in the near future we're going to see a lot of that kind of start to go away, I hope at least, because I mean that was probably the most divisive campaign we've seen in a very long time. And so I think the further we get away from it, the better everyone is going to come together in the future. That's what I think personally, but we'll see.
This is when everybody gets in a hunch, right? Well, let's remember this. You can't uncover what's not already there, right? So you pull up the rug and something had to be under there for it to be uncovered. So obviously, whatever tensions the country is feeling, those tensions were there before Trump, before Clinton. Nobody was talking about it, right? We all felt this stuff before. And hopefully, this won't be the last of our conversations. Were you guys okay with this one? So let's make this a regular thing, you know, and maybe anybody else who wants to be involved. But this is proof that you can remain civil. Now, when the cameras go off, we might fight. But right now, everything is kumbaya. So thank you guys for your time. That's like 5 minutes.